Welcome back, guys, to my countdown of the top 100 favourite films of the decade. This video, I'm going to be looking at the films that place between positions 60 and 51. Shall we get back to it? Right, so continuing the countdown, at position number 60, we have a film from genre-blending filmmaker Rian Johnson, and it's the time-hopping sci-fi Looper. Looper is set in 2044. Time travel hasn't been invented yet, but it will be around 2074, but it's massively illegal. However, in 2074, there are these hitmen who use time travel as a means to dispose of their targets' bodies. They send their targets back in time to 2044, where they are instantly killed and disposed of by these assassins who are called loopers. One of these loopers is our protagonist, Joe, who's played in this film by Joseph Gordon-Levitt. And the plot really kicks off when one of his targets, who Joe has to kill, comes back through the portal, turns out to be an older version of Joe himself, who's played by Bruce Willis. And what follows is a cat and mouse chase between young Joe and old Joe. Looper is like a hodgepodge of so many different things that you've seen in other films, like The Terminator, 12 Monkeys, Memento, Source Code. As ridiculous as it sounds, there's even a little bit of The Omen in here. But even though it borrows a lot from other materials, it still feels quite fresh and its own entity. Joseph Gordon-Levitt's versatility is on full display in Looper. He does a fantastic Bruce Willis impression. This is also the best Bruce Willis performance we had gotten in a long time. He's actually really good here. Looper is fast-paced, stylish, compelling, and there's so many layers to it. Alright, so let's move on to number 59. The next film on this list is one that I prejudged from the trailers, and I went into it with zero expectations, thinking it was going to be terrible, and came out of it absolutely loving it. It's one of my favourite comedies of the last 10 years, and it's Phil Lord and Christopher Miller's 21 Jump Street. The reason that 21 Jump Street works so well is, firstly, it's very aware of how unoriginal it is. Ice Cube even explains in a very meta monologue why he's the stereotypical angry black captain that you'd expect to see in a buddy cop film. The film is based off an 80s TV series and acknowledges just how ridiculous the plot actually was. Two youngish cops played by Channing Tatum and Jonah Hill pose as high school students, even though they look about 30, in order to get to the bottom of a drug ring investigation. You wouldn't expect something with such a silly plot to work, but 21 Jump Street does work because it commits to the shtick. It's also got a terrific script which expertly juggles so many different types of comedy. Sometimes it's zany, sometimes it's observational, sometimes it's meta, sometimes it's physical, sometimes it's trippy, sometimes it's lewd. But because it doesn't stick to one type of comedy, it never goes stale. Honestly, 21 Jump Street is probably the biggest genuine surprise of any film that I've watched over the last 10 years. It's why I like to say set the bar low and there's nowhere to go but up, and 21 Jump Street is up here. Right, so next up on the list is another comedy, and quite frankly, it's a film which I don't think gets the credit that it deserves. And I think part of the reason for this is because it is a Melissa McCarthy movie. She has made a lot of disposable, trashy comedies this past decade, but there is one gem amongst all those duds, and it's Paul Feig's Spy. Spy is one of those films where I feel the need to justify why I love it so much. Some might call it a guilty pleasure, but for me, I genuinely think it's underrated. As spy films go, it has the perfect blend of comedy and action. I had so much fun watching Spy. It is an absolute blast, and the script is downright hysterical. Melissa McCarthy is still playing to her comedic skill set, but with Susan, there's actually a fair bit of substance to her. She has this great character arc where she goes from this frumpy, adorable analyst into this badass agent, but she's backed up by this amazing supporting cast who she gets to bounce off of and trade insults with.
My father used to bring people here.
Did he also make you dress like a slutty dolphin trainer?
So yeah, you might think this one is a bit of an odd choice for my top 100, but I love this film. If you haven't seen it, give it a chance. It is firing on all cylinders. Okay, so next up on the list, we have another film from Christopher Nolan. This time it's his 10th film in his catalogue of work. It's his gripping war film, Dunkirk. Christopher Nolan is known for making cerebral original films, but this was the first film that he'd made which took on something historical. But even though this is a retelling of a World War II event, it still very much feels like a Nolan film. It's got the flavours of what we come to expect from his work. It plays with the concept of time. It doesn't use a typical linear narrative. He avoids CGI where possible and utilises practical stunts and effects. And he gets another incredible performance from Tom Hardy's eyeballs. Dunkirk is set obviously during World War II and details the evacuation of 400,000 soldiers who were boxed in on the beaches of Dunkirk from 3 different vantage points. land, sea, and sky. There's no real protagonist, rather a large ensemble of characters whose narratives intertwine. And the way that Nolan braids all of his narrative strands together is masterful. Dunkirk is intense, immersive, and it's one of the most thrilling war films that's ever been made. Okay, so next up we have David Mackenzie's gritty neo-western, Hell or High Water. Anybody that knows me knows that westerns aren't really my thing, but what David Mackenzie managed to successfully do was fuse western themes with gritty character drama as well as action, and it made it more accessible for me, and I loved Hell or High Water. Hell or High Water is written by Taylor Sheridan, and it is a classic shoot-'em-up cops and robbers cowboy story about two brothers who are played by Chris Pine and Ben Forster, who rob a series of banks in order to pay off their deceased mother's mortgage on their house. But hot on their trail is the surly, sardonic Texas Ranger Marcus Hamilton, who's played in this film by Jeff Bridges. David Mackenzie as a director gets everything about this film pitch perfect. The pacing, the atmosphere, the tone, the stakes. You couple that with Taylor Sheridan's amazing script, which has great character depth, as well as logical and emotional motivations as to why the two brothers are robbing these banks in the first place, and you've got yourself a tautly executed and exhilarating film. The action is well crafted, it's muted but still visceral. But at the end of the day, it's the character development which is front and center, not the action. You really do feel invested in the characters, and that's why Hell or High Water is such an enthralling watch. Before we continue with the countdown, now is a good time to remind you guys to hit that thumbs up button, and if you haven't done so already, don't forget to click that subscribe button. Alright, let's get back to it. Alright, so next up we have a film from Mexican director Alfonso Cuarón, and despite this film being very close to his heart, it still struck a chord with the masses. It is the extremely touching Roma. Not many foreign language films managed to make as much noise as Roma did. Roma is a film about everything and nothing. It's a film which looks at someone who often goes unnoticed but tells their story, however mundane it might be, in this very epic and cinematic way. Based on Cuarón's own real-life experiences of growing up in Mexico City during the time of the Mexican Dirty War, Cleo is our protagonist, and she's played by Yalitza Aparicio. She is a housekeeper who works for a middle-class family in 1970s New Mexico. Cleo is a substitute for Cuarón's own childhood housekeeper, Lebo, who this film is dedicated to. There are certain films where we're lucky to get one or two a year, which are so personal to an auteur that you can feel part of their soul is right there on the screen. Roma is one of these films. It's so raw, emotional, and detailed in the way that it's shot that it feels like we're looking into Cuarón's own memories. Roma explores class, race, political unrest, as well as family. It's essentially about life unfolding around us, which is relatable, but at the same time, it's foreign to us because this is someone else's story from a different culture. But because the core elements are universal, it transcends those cultural barriers. Cuarón poured every fiber of his being into Roma. He wrote it, he shot it, he was responsible for the cinematography, and he did the editing, okay? It's his blood, sweat, and tears in every cell of this film. It is a labor of love, and even though it's a black and white, foreign language, art house film, which is quite minimalistic, it's bursting with life and meaning. Roma is cinematic poetry. Alright, so next up on the list we have a late entry, but an absolute technical masterpiece. It's Sam Mendes' war film 1917. 1917's unique selling point as a war film could have easily been written off as a gimmick. The entire film is cleverly staged and edited to look like one continuous long take. Obviously it wasn't done in one long take, but Mendes has achieved the effect that he was going for. The plot sees two British soldiers played by George Mackay and Dean Charles Chapman venture off on an important mission to deliver a message to a squadron of 1,600 Allied troops, which should save all their lives. But the journey for them to get to these soldiers is anything but a walk in the park. They encounter every possible threat that you can imagine. This was a nail-biting watch. Never have I felt more immersed in a war film than 1917. The fluid, seemingly uncut camera work puts you right there in the action, and it results in this relentless feeling of anxiety. There's this paradoxical quality to Roger Deakins' cinematography. It somehow manages to feel quite dreamlike, but at the same time captures the nightmarish reality of war. They say that war is hell, but now that I've watched 1917, I actually feel like I've lived it. When you factor in how much planning, rehearsing, and precise timing that was required from everybody involved, It's utterly awe-inspiring how seamlessly it all comes together. 1917 is a majestic movie that was made for the big screen, and it manages to do something new with a story that you've seen before. It truly is unique and a visually stunning accomplishment. Okay, so next up we have a Marvel film, and it is my favorite of the Thor films, and it's Taika Waititi's Thor Ragnarok. Ragnarok was the much needed adrenaline shot that the Thor franchise required. The first two Thor films were perfectly fine, but Taika Waititi's Ragnarok completely rejuvenated the whole series. The MCU has been very skillful in reinventing itself, and they certainly were taking a gamble when they let Taika Waititi splash his exuberant flair as a director all over the Norse God franchise, but my god, did it pay off! Ragnarok is essentially a back-to-basics film which sees Thor stranded on a planet called Sakaar without his hammer Mjolnir, and he has to compete in this competition to earn his freedom so he can get back to Asgard and protect his people from the colossal threat of Hela, who's played by Cate Blanchett. Ragnarok is like a buddy cop film disguised as this intergalactic space cowboy roller coaster, and it is a hell of a lot of fun. Thor Ragnarok is easily the funniest movie in the entire MCU to date. The script for Ragnarok is so zany comparatively to the two previous Thor films, which is a welcome breath of fresh air. You can tell that everybody that was working on this was having a blast making it, and their visible enjoyment that's on the screen is infectious to the audience. The entertainment levels for Thor Ragnarok are off the freaking charts. Okay, so next up we have a Pixar sequel which took 14 years to come to fruition. It's the charming, intelligent, and very timely Incredibles 2. Brad Bird really took his time when it came to making an Incredibles sequel, which I do really respect because there was definitely a demand for an Incredibles sequel, and he could have just cobbled one together really quickly, and people would have paid good money to see it. But no, he took his time because he wanted to tell a story that he thought was worth telling. In the time since the first Incredibles movie came out back in 2004, the world has evolved. Superhero culture has evolved, technology has evolved, and Brad Bird's Incredibles 2 has evolved with these times. Incredibles 2 very much feels like a movie of the now, and it has so much to say about social media, image, perceptions, public relations, gender roles, and family. Incredibles 2 is a family film with bedazzling action, lots of relatable humor about family dynamics, and there's so much smart subtext embedded into the script which adults can appreciate. If you ask me, I think The Incredibles 2 is on the same level as its predecessor because there's something here for everybody to enjoy. Right, so coming in at number 51 is the film that introduced me to the voice of a very unique auteur. It's the delightful social satire from Greek filmmaker Yorgos Lanthimos. It is The Lobster. This film is truly a one of a kind. It has such a clever and original concept. In this dystopian world, unattached adults are given 45 days to find a mate, otherwise they are turned into an animal of their choice. Our protagonist is recently divorced David, played by Colin Farrell, who is sent off to this rather bleak hotel for singletons to try and find his perfect partner, but with a slim selection of candidates to choose from and the clock running out, David becomes increasingly desperate to try and avoid being turned into his animal of choice, the titular lobster. I just adored The Lobster because it's unlike anything that I've seen before, and it has so much to say about the whole societal pressure to try and pair up and find a mate. This film is steeped in allegory and grimly reflects how cold, clinical, and impersonal dating can be. The look and tone of The Lobster is so distinctly Lanthimos, particularly in the monotone delivery of the dialogue from his actors. It's deliciously deadpan and dark. You're laughing, but at the same time, you're disturbed by just how close to home the absurdism actually is.
If you encounter any problems you cannot resolve yourselves, you will be assigned children. That usually helps.
I freaking love the genius of this film. There we go, guys. That was my countdown from numbers 60 to 51. If you guys are enjoying these videos, don't forget to hit that thumbs up button. If you haven't done so already, click subscribe. And of course, I want to hear from you guys. What did you guys think of the films that made it into this video? What do you think? Should let your voice be heard in that comment section down below. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching. I shall see you guys in the next one.